Hi, my name is Marcus and I'm here on behalf of Fracture Sounds to show you their latest blueprint instrument, short strings. And if you happen to be new here, Blueprint is a series of free sample instruments compatible with the Kontakt 7 player that are curated from Fracture Sounds' experiments and passion projects. The last instrument in this series was Gentle Strings, a precursor to the brand new string formations library which has just been released. And now with this short strings patch as well, we have quite a selection of strings at our disposal. I'm going to talk you through the features of short strings very quickly, and then I'm going to show you a piece of music that I've written which shows how it sounds in context. Let's begin. Going to start by running through the controls as usual, and our beautiful Fracture Sounds instrument in an absolutely dashing shade of green today. I have to say, short strings and gentle strings put side by side, absolutely love that colour scheme, very nice. First control is called colour, which adjusts the brightness and the darkness of the instrument, and I'm going to set this to MIDI CC1 by right clicking, learn MIDI CC automation, and moving the fader that I want. Dynamics of course is controlled by velocity, so I'm just going to try and keep that as constant as I can. Our next control is stereo width, which if I bring this down, this brings all of the instruments into the center. And if I bring this up, it really enhances the stereo image and the panning between the different instruments. So the cello, and then the violins. And it's a little bit more in your face. I have to say that I absolutely love the open C string in the cello here. But if you don't want that resonance to muddy up your piece, you can use the release control here to tighten it up a bit. And all the way down. Our inbuilt reverb, and we have options here to change the settings. It's set by default to a hall, but we have all of these to choose from. My personal favourite being shimmer. I'm going to turn the size right up and adjust this so you can hear it. Very nice indeed. Let's have a look at the mic mix. Fracture Sounds really tried to aim to get a dry and intimate sound in this space. If I move this perspective slider so that we can hear the close mics on their own, you can really get a sense of how dry they are. And I do this every time I forget to turn the reverb off, so let me try that a second time. And for comparison, here are the far mics. I'm going to set this back to default by command clicking, and I'm going to go over here to these cogs to have a quick look in the settings tab. You can see here we've got a sample start time, and this cuts into the sample to maximize playability, but if you turn it all the way down you'll get the full uncut sample, which sounds a little bit more realistic. And you can see that it tells us how much latency we've got in milliseconds, so that's quite handy. Velocity response changes the audible difference between loud samples and soft samples. So if I turn this all the way up and play very quietly, the difference between this and the loudest I can play is quite significant. If I turn it all the way down, the softest I can play and the loudest I can play, more or less the same volume. I'm going to set this back to default, and now it's time to show you the piece of music that I've written. I hope you enjoy. Short and sweet. In the time it took me to think of what to show you on the screen, it had finished. That being said, I had a lot of fun writing this, and whilst it might not be my finest work ever, it definitely, I think, shows off the instrument quite well. And the other thing that I'd like to mention is that with the exception of Logic's inbuilt bass drum and cymbal, this is 100% Blueprint instruments. So let me just show you through, first and foremost, the instances of Fracture Sounds' short strings. I originally did sketch out this whole idea on one single track, and then separated it and made it a little bit more interesting, one instrument at a time, essentially. And if I solo these on their own, here's how the ending sounds. I sent all of these to a bus here, and you can see that I've just done a tiny bit of compression and then EQ'd some of the mid-range out about 1000 Hertz, which I generally find is quite a good place to EQ strings a little bit if you want to. Close mic'd violins 1, mid mics or violins 2, and violas, you can see we're getting more and more far away, and then the cellos have got a bit of a richer, bigger sound basically. Kept them all in stereo and just panned them a tiny bit. I used the mod wheel to bring down, almost like a volume control, but with just a little bit more nuance, violins 1 here. Which kind of gives us a little bit more dynamic range than just using velocity. And you can see that I spent some time trying to figure out the exact right velocity to have violins 1 and 2 playing together. I did my best, even though I probably shouldn't have done this, I did my best to try and keep the instruments separate on each line, which is why you can see the viola isn't moving very much. It's not the best viola line I've ever written, I'll be honest. The crossover between all the instruments is extremely smooth, meaning that doesn't really matter what you're doing, with the exception of the cello, which is obviously down on its own and nothing else can reach there. You have a little bit of crossover all the time. You can hear it here in the violas, which is absolutely fine. It's just, like I say, my writing style, I have to separate all the instruments out onto different tracks because I can't think in terms of it all being on the same track. I just end up playing it as if it were a keyboard. But honestly, it's when you have it all together in a piece of music, it's not particularly noticeable. And aside from that, we've got a few other instruments to look at. I'm going to solo out Fracture Sounds' textural violin here. And the reason that I've put in a layer of textural violin spikes is because the kind of randomized way in which it goes up and down in volume helps enhance the liveliness of the short strings. They have round robins, but by having this in as well, it's a little bit more chaotic. You don't even really hear the drone tone that it's playing. It's more just that kind of string brushing sound in the background, which, yeah, I mean, it just makes it sound like maybe there's just one player in the back of the hall that didn't get the sheet music. On top of this, we have Fracture Sounds gentle strings as well, which means my string writing isn't at its finest, given we've now got 2 string sections. But I think in this instance, I treated it a little bit more like a pad. Here's the chords that it plays, and this layers up rather nicely with short strings as well. Got greenhead chimes, both the OG and the Atmos layer. Nice sharp sound, isn't it? And I think I turned the damping up a bit because it was ringing out quite a long time before. Gentle winds. Maybe let me play a slightly more impressive bit. Fracture Sounds, toy piano. This is probably more for use as a percussion part, but it works quite well. Again, you wouldn't probably hear that in the piece originally, but now that you have, it's just kind of nice to have, isn't it, really? And the same could be said of our next track, which is Fracture Sounds, Festive Bells. But the way I made it sound a bit less Christmassy was to go into the settings here, go down to modulation, and then I turn down the sustain and then the decay time, so we've got a much sharper, snappier sound. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I think it does a pretty good job. Something weird about using Christmas sounding stuff when it's not Christmas, like when I tried using the handbells, it gave me a bit of an icky feeling when I thought of that awful song, and I thought about the fact that it is May and it is not Christmas. Moving swiftly on now, Fracture Sounds' electric keys. Just some basic chords here for a bit of texture. All honesty, I think I might have got a bit carried away. Probably didn't need these in the piece, but here they are nonetheless. We got it on amp signal, stereo spread turned way up just for a little bit of a bright in-your-face type sound. And you can see here that I set the velocity to be quite constant because I liked this particular sample. Had I wanted the volume to be constant, I could do the same as in short strings where you go into the settings and turn down velocity response. And finally, Fracture Sounds electric keys bass. The original instrument tuned down 36 semitones, direct signal, key press all the way down, key release all the way down, and then going into our settings, sample start, all the way up so that we don't have a huge amount of latency, and it sounds pretty good. And just in case you're interested, this is Logic's orchestral kit. And I suppose one last thing to mention is that we go from a straight 6/8 at 90 BPM to a 4/4 triplet at 120, which is the same sounding tempo, just measured differently. And the reason that I went for 90 and 120 was just because if it had been any other number, I would not have been able to do the maths. So that was why. And yeah, this was Fracture Sounds Short Strings, a fantastic companion to the Gentle Strings blueprint, as well as the full string formations library, the walkthrough for both of which can be found on this channel. And if you'd like to download Short Strings, you can do so for free. All you have to do is sign up to the Fracture Sounds newsletter. Otherwise, consider subscribing to this YouTube channel as well so you don't miss any more lovely free sample instruments in the future. And I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.